Welcome to On the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, and we are coming to you with this, our 150th episode. And we'll have more to commemorate that later in the episode, as well as more coverage of the Orioles minor leagues and more. But first, we're pleased to introduce a special guest. She joined the Orioles from the Houston Astros organization in 2019, first coming on board as the Director of Baseball Development. In June of 2022, she was promoted to Assistant General Manager of Baseball Operations. She is Eve Rosenbaum. Eve, great to have you on the show.
Yeah. Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
So let's go back to when you first joined the Orioles. You're leaving a Houston organization that was right in the middle of a great run of success. Was it hard to leave that to join Michael Eis and Sig Mejdal and join the rebuilding Orioles in your home state of Maryland?
So both yes and no. It was not a hard decision in the fact that I'd already worked with Mike, I'd already worked with Sig, I'd already worked with Chris Holt, who was over here as the pitching coordinator at the time. So in that sense, I sort of knew what I was getting myself into, and I was very comfortable working with those guys, and we already communicated really well and had really good rapport. And that's kind of like the best thing anyone can hope for in any job, is just having a good rapport with your colleagues and especially with your bosses. So it wasn't a hard decision from that standpoint. It wasn't a hard decision that I was basically coming back home because, I think as I've talked about, I grew up coming to Orioles games. The Nationals weren't even around until I was in middle school or high school. We grew up, we had season tickets to the Orioles games. So I was coming home and coming to work for my hometown team and coming to try to bring them back to prominence. And I would get to see my parents a lot more than I did when I was living in Texas. I get to see friends a lot more. I have a bunch of friends in Baltimore, still back down in Bethesda and Rockville where I grew up. And so that was going to be awesome, right? That was going to be a ton of fun. And I was going to get to try to bring this team that I grew up loving and caring so much about, try to get them back into the playoffs. So I was super pumped to take on that challenge and just move back to the East Coast. So it was not hard in that sense. What it was hard in the sense of, and I don't think this is unique to me, I don't think it's unique to baseball, I think this happens for everyone. Anytime you make a major life change, you got to stop and think about it, right? Just any sort of transition like that can be hard. I loved living in Houston. I didn't miss winters. I like snow. I like having seasons, but it's really nice to be able to wake up in January or February and put on a t-shirt, right? So I was going to have to adjust back to having seasons. Houston has amazing food. It's a very affordable city. I have a bunch of friends there, still have a bunch of friends there. So I had to, pick up my whole life and move. And when you switch a team in baseball, it's like it happens overnight. You don't get 2 weeks to say goodbye to people and put in your 2 weeks and things like that. It happens instantly. So I definitely put a lot of time into the decision, but ultimately I'm super pumped to be back here in Baltimore.
We're excited to have you as well. When
you
look up and down the Orioles roster, you see some positions like third base, second base, where you could seemingly be deciding between 2 or 3 players every single night. What goes into figuring out what roles those players will likely succeed in?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. And you guys have obviously been paying attention to the roster and to our lineups, these first few weeks of the season. So kudos to you guys for that. What the first thing comes to mind when I think of this is something from my playing days back in the day. I played softball in college, and I remember a game where we were playing BU, Boston University, and after the game, my coach went up to their coach and said, hey, you have girls playing out of position all over the field. What's up with that? And he just said, everyone's hitting. And if they're hitting, I have to get them in the lineup. So I'm figuring out where I can possibly play them. And that's really stuck with me throughout the years because it's totally true. If someone's hitting, they're going to fight their way into the lineup. And now you have to figure out where to put them. So the more positions that someone can play defensively, the higher their chances are of getting into the lineup if that bat is there. So I think you see that a lot with our roster. We have a ton of positional flexibility. We have guys who can play all over the field. Now, where they are on any particular night, Hyde sets the lineup each night with his coaching staff. They get together and they set the lineup. Now, there's a whole process that goes into that and a whole bunch of information that goes into that each night. ultimately Hyde has the final say. I know the night before the game and then the morning of the game, he meets with our advanced scouting staff. He calls them the Wizards. He says, hey, let's get the Wizards in here so we can talk about our lineup for the next day. And they go through, how the various players stack up against the opposing starting pitcher, how our various players stack up against the opposing bullpen. How many righties does that bullpen have? How many lefties does that bullpen have? Are their relievers rested? Who's their closer? We use that to think about pinch hit situations late in the game, which then can inform where people start. So they spend a lot of time discussing that. If the advanced scouts are the Wizards, then SIG's team up here, the analytics team, they're like magicians. They have a ton of data and a ton of reports that they're producing, and they make it in these nice, really pretty PDFs and online apps and everything that they blast out to our coaching staff. So our coaching staff can go through and use all this, literally it's like magical data information to inform their decisions. Our coaching staff, they're talking with Trey Weedman, who's our head strength and conditioning coach for our major league team, talking about these guys' endurance, how they're doing in the gym, whose workload is maybe too high and is in need of a rest day, whose workload is maybe a little bit too low, and so they should definitely keep playing, who's just right. And we're looking at that days in advance to try and figure out, hey, when's a good time to maybe rest someone? So, for example, tonight, Mullins is resting. Mullins, he runs a ton. He plays a very demanding position. We need him to keep his legs under him the entire year. So we have to be very methodical and strategic about when we pick our rest days for him. And it just so happens that we're playing a big stretch of lefty starters. So, hey, we have someone who can play center field who's a righty in McKenna. So let's give him the start tonight, maybe save Mullins for a pitch hit situation later in the game. So that's part of the conversation. Another part of the conversation comes from Brian Ebel and his team in the athletic training room, who's maybe dealing with some lingering injuries, who's being nagged a little bit, who might need a day or two off. There's all these conversations that go on, and sometimes it's the morning of, we're making last minute changes. Sometimes we're planning things 1 to 2 weeks in advance. But ultimately, there's just tons of information that everyone sort of puts their own spin on, and we get together and we talk about it. And then Hyde makes the final decision about what the lineup's going to be. We put those guys out on the field.
That's great information.
There you
go. Once a player gets close to the majors, what factors do you and the front office consider in deciding how to fit them onto the 26-man roster? You touched on the versatility piece a little bit, which is definitely something we've seen with a lot of Orioles prospects. But aside from where you're going to put them in the field, how much data are you looking at versus maybe relying on feedback from your player development staff about things about a player that maybe can't be quantified?
Yeah, it's all the above. It's both and all the above of those things. So from a statistical standpoint, we want them to, quote unquote, graduate from AAA. We want them to have mastered every level of the minors, mastered AAA, and then be ready to succeed physically from a performance standpoint in the majors. Because the thing about major leagues is that it's really, really hard. You can be really good at AAA and not succeed in the majors. That happens to a ton of guys. So we want someone to feel like, hey, they've really mastered AAA. They are really ready for this challenge of the majors. The majors is the last thing that they have the last area where they need to develop, the last area that they need to master. So we look at their performance in AAA, but one of the big things about being a scout or any sort of baseball evaluator is that you're not just looking at performance, you're looking at what's underlying that performance. How is he getting to his performance? How has he been attacked by opposing pitchers? If you're a hitter, if you are a pitcher, how much are you throwing your breaking ball versus your fastball? What are you getting whiffs on? What does it look like on video? What are you fooling guys with? What are guys not being fooled with? How are you executing with 2 strikes? Are you able to throw strike to ball or ball to ball, as Chris Holt, our pitching coach, will say? Just your ability to locate your pitches in different areas. We have so much data that we can look at and so much video that we can look at. And we do look at all of that. and ultimately feel like we have a pretty good idea of whether or not someone's able to succeed in the majors yet. But a huge part of being successful in the majors is being able to deal with the grind on a daily basis, to deal with the pressure of being up here, to deal with the really, really good pitching that you're going to see if you're a hitter, to deal with the balls that fly off bats at 110, 105 miles an hour, and be able to execute your defense, every single time. So we spent a lot of time talking to our coaching staff about that. I talked to Ramsey a lot. I talked to Buck Britton a lot down at Norfolk. One of the great things about having so many of our minor league teams in the area here close to Baltimore is that we can talk to Matt Blood, our farm director, and Ken Qualls, our director of minor league ops, all the time. Text, Slack, email, phone calls. I'll go get tacos with Matt sometimes. He'll come to the games here and we'll sit and we'll just talk about it. Hey, how's this guy dealing with adversity? How's he dealing with the new drills that the hitting coaches are giving him? How's he dealing with sliders? We told him he needs to work on sliders. How's he taking to that? Is he sort of fighting back against it, or did he acknowledge maybe he has a hole in his swing? Hey, he went 0 for 20. How's he dealing with that? Is he okay? Is he breaking bats? How's this guy sleeping? What's going on in his mind? There's all these sorts of questions that we are constantly inquiring about and talking about to know, okay, the data says he's ready, but how's his mentality? Okay, his mentality says he's ready. What does he need to do to show us that he's ready to perform at the major league level? So we put all that together, we make a decision, and ultimately when we call a guy up, we want him to be in a position to succeed. Because again, it's really hard. When we called Adley up last year, and Adley's, the unanimous #1 prospect, he struggled for a little bit when he first got called up, just adjusting the big league pitching, adjusting to the quality of stuff you see up here. Now it seems, like smooth sailing. Gunnar struggling a little bit right now, even though he was also the unanimous #1 prospect. It's just really, really hard to play Major League Baseball. We want to make sure that when someone comes up, they are really ready to succeed, because we don't want to put our players in a position where they're going to struggle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Matt Blood, he's a great guy. We got to get him back on here. His boy Joey Ortiz hitting balls 114 miles per hour in AAA. So he's up before long. Part of what has allowed the Orioles to maybe get good sooner than a lot of the media thought and take a step forward has been the success on the waiver wire with guys like Ramon Urias, Jorge Mateo, Ciano Perez, Austin Voth, and even Danny Kalum looks really good so far this season. Has there been one player in particular that you were really excited to get in and claim him and get him in there, and you knew you could do something with him?
Yeah. Well, like you just mentioned, so many of the guys who are integral to our major league team right now, we got on the waiver wire, and we joked internally last year about doing waiver Wednesdays, where every Wednesday we'd give out a bobblehead of a different player who we'd claim on the waiver wire. We thought that would be kind of a funny thing. But I think all of them we were super excited to get. A couple that come to mind, one would be CNL. I was actually part of the international scouting staff who signed CNL back in Houston. I actually was, I think, our last scout to go see him. It was me and then Charlie Gonzalez, who was our senior scouting advisor at Houston, and he's still there. And CNL was pitching in the Bahamas. I think it was Labor Day 2015, so September 2015. And Charlie and I, he was getting ready to figure out where he was going to sign. Charlie and I hopped on a flight and flew down to Bahamas and saw him in the morning, flew back that night. And then he ended up signing with us in Houston. So I was super excited, ecstatic to get CNL over here, because I've always known what his stuff was. I've seen it live. I've seen it in video. I've met his family. He just needed runway to be able to perform. And luckily we had that up here in Baltimore. And he's really been able to show off his stuff and to show what he can do up here, which he just unfortunately didn't have that runway with previous teams. So I was really excited to get CNL. On the position player front, we were every day we were checking the waiver wire to see if Mateo was going to end up on the waiver wire. Because similar to how CNL didn't really have the runway with the Astros and the Reds, Mateo never really had the runway with San Diego to show off what his skills were in the majors. He'd always hit in the minors. He'd done very well in AA and in AAA. If you watch this video, you could tell that he had all the tools to be an elite shortstop. He just, because San Diego is a very good team, wasn't playing every day. He was bouncing back and forth, between center field and other positions. And he was, out of options with them. And so the day he turned up and we grabbed him and we said, let's put this guy out at short. Let's give him just a really long runway, make him the starter and see what we've got. And, sure enough, now you have the best defender in the whole game out there. You just had to give him that platform to be an everyday player for him to, reach his potential.
Which is one of the good things about the rebuilding phase, right? You have the leeway to do that and give these guys a chance. A little less possible now, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit like a silver lining.
Yeah, it does seem like a good problem to have right now where your major league roster is getting better. And we just saw with Kyle Stowers being sent down to AAA despite, his past performance at Norfolk. How do you plan to balance that going forward where you may have a guy who's excelling at AAA, but there just isn't quite the room for him at the major league level?
Yeah, like you said, it's a good problem to have. In fact, I would say it's kind of like an excellent problem to have. And knock on wood, everyone seems to be pretty much healthy right now on the position player front. On the pitching front, we have a few guys on the IL, of course. But one of the things you have to plan for is that not everyone's going to be healthy all year. We've seen teams, even within our division the past few years, have 10 guys on the IL. And then if you don't have depth, if you don't have good depth, all of a sudden you can't compete at the major league level anymore. Teams like the Rays and the Yankees and the Red Sox are able to keep plugging away and deal with the adversity of injuries because they have so much depth who is capable of performing at the major league level. So that is something that we plan for, having injuries. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but we want to have depth. But ultimately, for players like Stowers, it goes back to what I was saying before. We want them to really have mastered AAA and the minors and really be ready to succeed in the majors. And we want them to have an everyday position in the majors. So with Stowers, excellent power hitter. Unfortunately for him, he's up against Santander, who has really come into his own these past few years. Hayes, is hitting leadoff for us right now and has absolutely been on fire since spring training. Mullins, who's potentially the best defensive center fielder in the game, and as we all know, has the capability to hit 30 home runs. McKenna, who's a very, very good sort of fourth outfielder, can run the bases, lightning fast, can play a really good defense in all three areas. And here in Camden Yards, we essentially have two center fields. We have center field and left field. So just, unfortunately for Stowers, he has to show that he's better than all of those guys on a daily basis, both at the plate and defensively. And again, in Camden Yards, it's like we have two center fields. So where he might be able to play left field in other ballparks, here he's more going to be a right fielder type. And then you're up against Santander every day. Well, Santander plays right field. He can also DH. If he's DHing, when we want to give Adley a rest, he needs to DH. So that's how you get into this point where you're like, oh my God, I'm putting this jigsaw puzzle together and I have too many pieces. What do I do? And so that's when we say, okay, has Stowers, passed the level of our other outfielders yet? Maybe in some areas he has, but in terms of an everyday execution standpoint at the plate, maybe he hasn't. Okay, let's figure out why that might be happening. Okay, he has a ton of exit velo. He's always displayed that. What type of pitches is he swinging at? Is he being patient? Is he drawing walks? Is he able to hit off speed and breaking balls and fastballs? Is he able to cover all parts of the plate? And then we're able to find little things, whether it's Stowers or whether it's someone else or whether it's a pitcher, find little things that we feel like they can be exploited with at the major league level. Let them know, say, hey, you're almost there. Go back to AAA, work with Josh, work with Ramsey, work with Buck, work with your coaches, really focus on these things. do it every single day, figure out how to execute every single day, master it again. Once your performance keeps creeping up in AAA and you become more consistent, at that point, you're going to be able to fight your way back onto the team, and we're going to figure out where to put you, and we're going to figure out the best situations in which to deploy you so that you can succeed when you're up here. So it definitely is a good problem to have. I can't think of any team that has ever really suffered because they had too many good players. You saw the Astros last year. They had a 6-man rotation going. They still didn't want to trade any of their starters because you need that depth in all positions in order to really be a good playoff team.
Yeah.
So I hope that's a useful answer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And fans are justifiably excited about the future with all these young, talented players breaking through. I mean, you were the #1 farm system in baseball. You graduate Adley, Gunnar takes his place. Gunnar graduates, maybe Jackson Holliday takes his place. So, yeah, I think you got a good thing going there.
I like your thinking.
One of my favorite Eve Rosenbaum quotes is from the Fangraphs audio podcast when you said player development powerhouse. We've been saying that a lot around here. That just doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. How do you decide which guys you want to extend before they hit arbitration or free agency? And is it possible we could see that anytime soon before the start of next season?
Yeah. Of course, that's a really good question. And I know it's something that the fans are always, on the edge of their seats to see what we're going to do. This might sound like a canned answer. It might sound cliche, but really at all times, we're keeping all of our options open. So, we have a bunch of, data wizards running around up here. We're able to look at the composition of our roster now. What's the composition of our roster going to be in the future? Where are guys likely to be playing? How long are they going to be up here? How do they fit in with the rest of the roster over future years? And then we figure out, hey, let's go offer this guy an extension. Let's offer this guy an extension. Let's offer this guy an extension. We have people who are constantly working on that, almost full time, working on possible extensions and contracts that we're going to offer players. And we talk with agents about it. We talk with agents about it over the off season, during season, at spring training. And as Sig says, we need to have a meeting in the minds. We need to have an agreement come into place. So we want all these guys who you're seeing out here to be Orioles absolutely as long as possible. And we're always thinking of ways about, hey, who should we approach? How should we approach them? How much wiggle room do we have here? And we're always in touch with agents. And, unfortunately, nothing's really come to fruition yet, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop trying. We're still talking to players and we're talking to agents, and we have the agents, they come up, we go out to dinner, we watch a game with them, things like that. It really is a constant process because we want to win just as much as you guys want us to win, just as much as all the fans out there want to win. And the best way to do that is to keep these studs up here as long as possible. So we're going to keep hacking away at it, until we're back in the playoffs, and try to keep these guys up here with the playoff Orioles as long as possible.
So this will be the last question from me, but we're at the very early stage of the season here. Who has stood out to you on the major league side, and do you think that there's a player really poised for a breakout this year?
Yeah, well, it's really hard not to say Hayes, right? He was like I think people were saying at the end of camp that like he and Waiver were like our hottest hitters, and Hayes has really taken off with that. He was hitting leadoff again for us tonight. He's hitting the ball over the wall in left field. So that's been really awesome to see because we've always known he has the defense. We've always known he has the arm. He's got an 80 arm pretty much on the 20 to 80 scouting grade. I would pick him to throw out any base runner. And now he's showing it with his bat. He's swinging at good pitches. He's driving the ball. He's being more patient at the plate. That's what we need. So I think Hayes has been really impressive so far, in the way that Santander was impressive last year. And Santander, he'll get there. It is early. We've played like 11 games, so it's early. So I've been really impressed with Hayes so far. And then, of course, Mountcastle, and we're coming off of his 9 RBI night. I mean, he torched those balls last night. It was like 109, 110 miles an hour. right? Again, over the wall out in left center field. Mountcastle might be the best pure hitter we have on the team. It's really hard to argue with Adley, but Mountcastle might be the best pure hitter. Santana might be the best pure hitter. We want, Gunnar could be the best pure hitter. On any given day, any of those guys could be the best pure hitter. Mountcastle absolutely is up there in that conversation, as you should be if you're a primarily first base or DH. And we're, again, so much of what being in the major leagues is just learning how to execute consistently. And it is almost impossibly hard. And now we're seeing Mountcastle. He has a couple of seasons under his belt. And I think we're poised to see him figure out how to execute consistently at the plate for months on end against incredibly tough pitching, but to be able to do that pretty much every day. So he's been on the right track so far, and I think we're poised to see him do it the rest of the season as well.
Yeah, it just seems like he's physically incapable of having soft contact, at least right now. And even last year, he hit the ball hard. He was so unlucky. But
yeah,
my last question.
Yeah, he was so unlucky last year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, you guys are right about that. Mm-hmm.
Most important question, though, is who in the organization is your Grogu / Baby Yoda that you would protect with your life? And how would you do it?
Yeah, so they gave me a heads up that you were going to ask this, which is because I brought props to show you. This is good. Yeah, so I'm a big Star Wars fan. Who's not a Star Wars fan, really? But there's really only one Baby Yoda. So here we go. Grogu can hang out with Birdie here. There we go.
Love it.
And I brought a hat. My brother works for Disney, so I get all this cool Disney gear. So there we go.
You got the hookup. That's awesome.
Baby Yoda hat. But yeah, there's only one Baby Yoda, so I don't think I could compare any of our players to Baby Yoda. But we got to keep them all here. That's the goal. Keep them all here. They can all be Baby Yoda for that standpoint.
Absolutely. This is the way.
Yeah. I love it. It's Wednesday. Tonight after the game, I'm going to go home and watch the Mando episode.
Well, Eve, thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck tonight against Oakland and the rest of the way this season.
Yeah, thanks. Hoping to get a series sweep here.